Hello and welcome to Tales by the Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight we gather in the flickering glow of 221B Baker Street, where the air is thick with mystery and the scent of pipe tobacco. Join me, Dr. John Watson, as I recount a case most singular, Blood on the Clocktower of Piccadilly. Chapter 1. A Visitor in the Fog. It was a chill November evening in 1888, and London lay smothered beneath a fog so dense it seemed the city had been draped in a shroud of gray velvet. The gas lamps along Baker Street cast feeble pools of light, their glow swallowed by the swirling mist. I had returned from a long day at my medical practice, my bones aching from the damp, and was warming my hands by the fire in our sitting room. Sherlock Holmes lounged in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his sharp gray eyes fixed on the pages of the Times. His violin lay neglected on the table, a rare moment of stillness for a man whose mind was ever in motion. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the room, and I confess I was lulled into a state of drowsy comfort. The ticking of the mantel clock was the only sound, save for the occasional clatter of a passing hansom cab or the distant cry of a costermonger braving the fog. Holmes, however, was alert, his gaze darting from the newspaper to the window, as if expecting some interruption to our quiet evening. That interruption came sooner than I anticipated. A sharp rap at the door startled me from my reverie, and Mrs. Hudson's voice, tinged with her usual mix of patience and exasperation, announced a visitor. "A lady, Mr. Holmes," she said, poking her head into the room. "She's in a right state, says it's urgent." Holmes' eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "Show her in, Mrs. Hudson," he said, folding the newspaper with a crisp snap. I straightened in my chair, curious despite myself. Urgent visitors to 221B were seldom bearers of trivial news. The door opened and a young woman stepped into the room, her figure shrouded in a dark cloak, the hem damp from the wet streets. A veiled hat obscured her face, but her posture, rigid, trembling, spoke of distress. She hesitated at the threshold, as if unsure whether to advance or flee, and I rose instinctively to offer her a chair. "Pray be seated," I said gently. "You are safe here." She nodded, a small, jerky motion, and sank into the chair nearest the fire. Holmes regarded her with that piercing scrutiny that seemed to strip away all pretense, his lean frame leaning forward slightly. "You have come to us in some trouble, madam," he said, his voice low and precise. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. Omit no detail, for even the smallest trifle may prove significant." The lady lifted her veil, revealing a face pale and drawn, with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. She could not have been more than 25, with delicate features and auburn hair pinned beneath. Her hat, her hands, gloved in black, twisted nervously in her lap. "My name is Eleanor Grayson," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "I come to you, Mr. Holmes, because I am at my wits' end. My brother, Arthur Grayson, has vanished, and I fear he is entangled in a matter most sinister." Holmes' expression remained impassive, but I knew the spark in his eyes betrayed his interest. "Begin at the beginning, Miss Grayson," he said. "Tell us all you know of your brother's disappearance." She drew a shuddering breath as if steeling herself. "Arthur is a watchmaker, one of the finest in London. His shop in Soho is renowned for its precision, and he has crafted timepieces for gentlemen of high standing. 3 nights ago he was summoned to Piccadilly Circus to repair the great clock tower there. It was an unusual request, for such work is typically done by the city's engineers, but Arthur was flattered by the commission. He left his shop at dusk, promising to return by supper. Her voice broke, and she pressed a gloved hand to her lips. I leaned forward, offering her a glass of water from the sideboard, which she accepted with a grateful nod. He did not return, she continued. I waited until midnight, then went to his shop, but it was locked and dark. The next morning I learned from a constable that a pool of blood had been found at the base of the clock tower near the steps leading to its interior. No body was discovered, but I know in my heart it is connected to Arthur. Holmes' fingers tapped lightly on the arm of his chair, a sign of his mind racing. This blood, he said, has it been analyzed? The police say it is human, Miss Grayson replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They dismiss it as the result of some vagrant's mishap or a brawl, but I cannot believe that. Arthur is not a man to be caught in such affairs. He is quiet, meticulous, devoted to his craft. And then there is this. She reached into her reticule and produced a folded piece of paper, its edges worn and stained. I found this slipped under my door the morning after he vanished. Holmes took the note, unfolding it with care. I leaned over his shoulder, catching sight of a hurried scrawl in black ink. The tower holds the key, but the shadow moves. The words sent a chill down my spine, though I could not say why. Holmes' lips curved into the faintest of smiles, the kind that appeared when a puzzle piqued his curiosity. A curious phrase, he murmured, turning the paper to catch the light. The ink is fresh, the handwriting agitated but precise. Your brother wrote this, Miss Grayson? I believe so, she said. It matches his hand, though it is less steady than usual. Mr. Holmes, I fear he is in grave danger, or worse. The police will do nothing, and I have nowhere else to turn. Holmes handed the note to me, his eyes never leaving Miss Grayson. Describe your brother's habits, his associates, any recent changes in his demeanor. Miss Grayson clasped her hands tightly. Arthur is 32, unmarried and lives above his shop. He is reserved but kind, with few friends outside his trade. Lately he has been preoccupied, often working late into the night. He spoke of a great project, something that would change the rhythm of London, but he would not elaborate. I thought it mere enthusiasm for his craft, but now I wonder if it drew him into peril. Holmes rose abruptly, pacing to the window. The fog pressed against the panes, rendering the street below a blur of shadows. Did he mention any names? A client, a rival, a creditor? None that I recall, she said, though he did mention a gentleman who visited his shop last week, a man of wealth who commissioned a custom timepiece. Arthur seemed uneasy about him, but he said little. Holmes turned, his silhouette sharp against the window. And the clock tower? Had he worked there before? Never, she replied. He was surprised by the summons, as it came through a letter rather than an official request. He showed me the letter briefly, but I did not read it. Holmes' eyes narrowed. The letter, do you have it? She shook her head. It was in his shop, but when I looked yesterday, his desk was in disarray and the letter was gone. Holmes returned to his chair, his movements brisk. Miss Grayson, your brother's disappearance is no mere accident. The blood, the note, the missing letter, these are threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. I will take your case. Watson and I shall visit Piccadilly Circus tomorrow to examine the scene. In the meantime, return to your home and speak of this to no one. Miss Grayson's shoulders sagged with relief, though her eyes remained haunted. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I cannot pay much, but Holmes waved a hand dismissively. My fees are secondary to the pursuit of truth. Mrs. Hudson will see you to a cab. As our landlady escorted Miss Grayson into the fog, I turned to Holmes, who was already lighting his pipe, the smoke curling upward like a wraith. What do you make of it, Holmes? I asked. The blood, the note. It's all so cryptic. Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes glinting in the firelight. Cryptic, yes, but not impenetrable. The blood suggests violence, yet the absence of a body raises questions. The note is a clue, Watson, left either by Arthur Grayson or someone wishing us to believe it was him. And this great project, it smacks of something larger than a watchmaker's ambition. Tomorrow we shall see what secrets the clock tower holds. He rose, retrieving his violin and drawing the bow across the strings, producing a mournful note that seemed to echo the fog outside. "The game is afoot, Watson," he said, his voice alight with anticipation, "and I suspect it will be a most diverting one." I settled back in my chair, the weight of the mystery settling over me. The fire burned low and the fog pressed closer as if London itself were holding its breath. Chapter 2. The Clock Tower's Shadow. The following morning, as the first rays of a weak November sun struggled to pierce the fog, Sherlock, Holmes and I set out for Piccadilly Circus. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the mingled scents of coal smoke, wet wool, and the faint tang of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. London was awakening, its streets alive with the clatter of hooves, the cries of newsboys, and the rumble of omnibuses. Yet as we approached the heart of the city, my thoughts were fixed on the mystery at hand. The disappearance of Arthur Grayson, the cryptic note, and the ominous pool of blood at the base of the Piccadilly clock tower. Holmes, clad in his Inverness cape and deerstalker, strode with purpose, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. I hurried to keep pace, my medical bag slung over my shoulder, a habit from my army days that I found hard to break. "What do you hope to find, Holmes?" I asked, my breath visible in the chill air. "Clues, Watson," he replied, his voice crisp. "The scene of a crime, or in this case a presumed crime, is a canvas painted with details. The blood, the ground, the tower itself, they will speak, if we listen." We reached Piccadilly Circus, a whirl of activity even in the fog. The clock tower stood as a sentinel amidst the chaos, its great face ticking steadily, a silent overseer of the city's pulse. The surrounding square was a kaleidoscope of life. Flower girls hawked their blooms, gentlemen in top hats dodged street urchins, and hansom cabs jostled for space. The statue of Anteros, poised with his bow, seemed to watch our approach with indifference. Holmes led me to the base of the clock tower, where a faint stain marred the cobblestones, now partially washed away by the damp. He knelt, his magnifying glass glinting in the dim light, and examined the spot with the intensity of a man deciphering an ancient text. "Observe, Watson," he said, gesturing to the stain. "The blood is no more than 3 days old, as Miss Grayson's account suggests. Note the splatter pattern, high velocity radiating outward. This was no mere spill. It suggests a wound, likely inflicted with force." I crouched beside him, peering at the darkened stones. "A stabbing, perhaps," I ventured, drawing on my medical experience. "Possibly," Holmes replied, "though the absence of a body complicates matters. Blood alone does not a murder make." He traced the edge of the stain with a gloved finger, then stood, his gaze sweeping the area. "The position is curious, near the steps to the tower's interior, yet exposed to the street. Whoever left this blood did so in a place where discovery was inevitable." My eyes followed his to the iron door at the base of the clock tower, its surface weathered but sturdy. "Do you think Arthur Grayson was attacked here?" I asked. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he circled the tower's base, his eyes darting from the cobblestones to the walls. He paused at a narrow crack in the stonework, barely visible in the shadow of the tower. With a deft movement, he extracted a small object, holding it up to the light. It was a tiny gear, no larger than a shilling, its edges gleaming with precision. "A watchmaker's gear," Holmes said, turning it in his fingers. "Too fine for the clock tower's mechanism. This belongs to a pocket watch or a similar device. Arthur Grayson was here, Watson, and this gear suggests he was working on something delicate." I frowned, puzzled. But why leave it behind? If he was attacked, surely he wouldn't drop a gear so carelessly. Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. Carelessness or design? That is the question. He pocketed the gear and turned his attention to the crowd. Come, Watson. The street may have witnessed more than the stones. We approached a street vendor, a grizzled man with a weathered face, roasting chestnuts over a brazier. His name, he told us, was Tompkins, and he claimed to have been in the square the night Arthur vanished. Saw summat queer, I did, he said, his voice rough as gravel. A cloaked figure moving fast like a rat scurrying from a cat. Came from the tower, he did, just after I heard a cry, sharp like someone got a fright. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Describe this figure, he demanded. Tompkins scratched his chin, his eyes squinting against the smoke. Tall maybe, but hard to tell with the fog. Wore a fine coat like a toff, but he weren't strolling like one. Ran off toward Regent Street, quick as you please. Holmes pressed him further, his questions sharp and unrelenting. But Tompkins' story held firm. He had seen no face, no weapon, only the fleeting shadow of a man in flight. And the cry? Holmes asked. Was it a man's voice or a woman's? Man's, I'd wager, Tompkins said. But the fog plays tricks, don't it? Holmes thanked him with a nod and handed him a shilling, though I suspected it was more for his cooperation than his chestnuts. As we moved away, I glanced at my friend. Do you believe him, Holmes? A cloaked figure sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. Truth, Watson, is often stranger than fiction, he replied. Tompkins has no reason to lie, and his account aligns with the blood. A cry, a fleeing figure, a pool of blood. These are pieces of a puzzle, but we lack the frame. We circled back to the clock tower where Holmes examined the iron door. It was locked, but he produced a set of picks from his pocket and with a few deft movements had it open. The interior was dark, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. A narrow staircase spiraled upward, leading to the clock's mechanism. Holmes ascended, his lantern casting eerie shadows on the walls, and I followed, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and unease. The clock's gears loomed above us, a labyrinth of iron and brass, their slow grinding filling the air with a relentless tick-tock. Holmes moved with purpose, his magnifying glass sweeping over the machinery. No signs of tampering here, he said, his voice echoing in the confined space. But look, here, on the platform. He pointed to a smudge on the iron floor, barely visible in the lantern's light. It was a partial footprint, the sole marked with a distinctive pattern. A gentleman's boot, Holmes said, recently polished yet scuffed at the heel. Our cloaked figure, perhaps? I nodded, impressed as always by his keen observation. But what was Arthur doing here? Repairing the clock or something else? Holmes did not answer immediately. He crouched, examining the platform's edge, where a faint scratch marked the metal. This is no repair job, Watson. The gear we found, the cryptic note, these suggest a purpose beyond mere maintenance. Arthur Grayson was involved in something extraordinary. We descended the tower, the weight of the mystery pressing heavier with each step. Outside, the fog had thickened, cloaking Piccadilly Circus in a ghostly veil. Holmes stood for a moment, his eyes scanning the square as if he could pierce the mist with his gaze. The blood, the gear, the footprint, the fleeing figure, he murmured. They form a chain, Watson, but one link is missing. We must find Arthur Grayson's shop and learn more of this great project Miss Grayson mentioned. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter against the damp. Do you think he's alive, Holmes? He turned to me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Alive or dead, Watson, he has left us a trail, and I intend to follow it. As we hailed a hansom cab to take us to Soho, the clock tower's bell tolled, its deep chime reverberating through the fog. It felt like a warning or perhaps a challenge, and I knew that this case, like so many before it, would test the limits of Holmes' genius and my own endurance. Chapter 3. The Watchmaker's Secret. The fog clung to London like a persistent spectre as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way from Piccadilly Circus to the narrow streets of Soho. The hansom cab's wheels rattled over the cobblestones, and the city's pulse seemed to throb in time with the distant tolling of church bells. My mind was still fixed on the blood-stained cobblestones and the tiny gear Holmes had found at the clock tower, a gear that hinted at Arthur Grayson's presence and purpose. Holmes, as usual, was silent, his sharp features set in contemplation, his eyes darting to the passing shadows as if they might yield answers. We alighted in a dimly lit street where the gas lamps flickered weakly against the encroaching mist. Arthur Grayson's shop stood at the corner, its sign, a gilded clock face, swinging gently in the damp breeze. The windows were dark, the shutters drawn, giving the place an air of abandonment. Holmes paused before the door, his gloved hand testing the lock. "Curious," he murmured. "The door is secure, yet Miss Grayson mentioned her brother's desk was in disarray. Someone has been here since her visit." With a swift motion, he produced his lockpicks and set to work. The lock yielded with a soft click, and we stepped into the shop, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and machine oil. The interior was a marvel of organized chaos. Shelves lined with clocks of every size, their pendulums swinging in a hypnotic chorus. Workbenches cluttered with gears, springs, and delicate tools, and glass cases displaying pocket watches that gleamed like jewels. The ticking filled the room, a relentless reminder of time's passage, and I felt a chill despite the warmth of my coat. Holmes lit a lantern, its glow casting long shadows across the room. "Mind your step, Watson," he said, moving toward the workbench at the far end. "We are not alone in seeking answers here." I glanced around, my hand instinctively resting on the revolver in my pocket. The shop felt alive, as if the clocks themselves were watching us. Holmes, undeterred, began examining the workbench, his magnifying glass sweeping over the scattered tools and papers. "Arthur Grayson was meticulous," he said, picking up a pair of tweezers. "Yet this chaos suggests haste or interference." My attention was drawn to a small portrait on the wall, depicting a stern-looking man with a watchmaker's loop over one eye. "Is that Grayson?" I asked. Holmes glanced at it briefly. Likely his father, given the style of dress. A family trade, perhaps. He returned to the workbench, where a leather-bound ledger caught his eye. Flipping it open, he scanned the entries, records of sales, repairs, and commissions. "Nothing out of the ordinary," he muttered, save for a recent order for rare Swiss gears, far too fine for common timepieces. He moved to a drawer which was slightly ajar and extracted a bundle of papers. Among them was a diagram meticulously drawn depicting the inner workings of the Piccadilly clock tower. Strange symbols, circles, lines, and cryptic notations were scrawled in the margins. Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "These are not mechanical annotations, Watson," he said, holding the diagram to the light. "They resemble a cipher or perhaps a code. Grayson was concealing something." I peered over his shoulder, the symbols meaningless to my untrained eye. "A code for what?" I asked. "And why hide it in a diagram?" Holmes did not answer immediately. He folded the diagram and tucked it into his coat, then turned his attention to the floor. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, marred the polished wood near the workbench. "Someone stood here," he said, crouching to examine it. "A man's boot, similar to the print in the clock tower, but fresher. And look," he pointed to a tiny speck of ash on the floor. "Cigar ash, Watson. Not a common brand, given its texture. Our visitor was no ordinary thief." The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, as if urging us to haste. Holmes moved to a side door, which led to a narrow staircase. Grayson lived above the shop, he said. Let us see what his private quarters reveal. We ascended the creaking stairs to a small, sparsely furnished room. A single bed, a writing desk, and a wardrobe comprised the entirety of Arthur Grayson's living space. The desk was littered with papers, many torn or crumpled, as if someone had rifled through them in a hurry. Holmes sifted through the debris, his movements precise. Miss Grayson was correct, he said. The letter summoning Grayson to the clock tower is gone. But this... He held up a small notebook, its pages filled with hurried sketches and calculations. This may hold the key to his great project. As Holmes examined the notebook, a faint sound, a soft shuffle, came from below. I froze, my hand tightening on my revolver. "Holmes," I whispered. "Someone's in the shop." He raised a hand for silence, his eyes narrowing. With the stealth of a cat, he moved to the staircase, motioning for me to follow. We descended slowly, the lantern's light dim to avoid detection. The shop was as we had left it, but the air felt different, charged with an unseen presence. Holmes' gaze darted to the workbench where a shadow moved. A figure, slight and nervous, hunched over the papers. "Stay where you are," Holmes said sharply, raising the lantern. The figure started, revealing a young man, no more than 20, with pale features and trembling hands. He clutched a pocket watch, his eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" I demanded, stepping forward. The youth swallowed hard. "Daniel Finch," he said, his voice quavering. "I'm Mr. Grayson's apprentice. I was just checking the shop." Holmes' expression was unreadable, but his voice was cold. "At this hour in the dark, with your master missing? Explain yourself, Mr. Finch." Finch's hands shook as he set the watch down. "I heard about Mr. Grayson," he stammered. I thought I might find something to help. He's been good to me, sir, taught me everything I know." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes boring into the young man. "What do you know of his work at the clock tower? And of this great project he spoke of?" Finch hesitated, his gaze flickering to the door as if contemplating flight. "He was obsessed with the clock," he said at last. "Kept saying it was more than a timepiece, that it could move the city. I thought he was talking nonsense, but he spent nights sketching, muttering about mechanisms and shadows." Holmes held up the diagram with the cryptic symbols. "And this? Did he share its meaning with you?" Finch's eyes widened. "That's his work, but he never explained it. Said it was too dangerous to speak of. He was afraid, sir, in the days before he vanished. Kept looking over his shoulder, locking the shop early." Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. "Afraid of whom, Mr. Finch?" The apprentice shook his head. "I don't know. He mentioned a gentleman, a client who came last week. A tall man, finely dressed, but Mr. Grayson didn't like him. Said he asked too many questions about the clock tower job." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, and I knew his mind was racing. "You will remain here, Mr. Finch," he said. "We may have further questions. Watson, we must return to Baker Street and examine this diagram. It holds the key to Grayson's intentions and perhaps his fate." We left the shop, locking the door behind us. The fog had thickened, swallowing the street in a gray haze. As we hailed a cab, I glanced back at the shop, its windows dark and unyielding. "Do you trust Finch, Holmes?" I asked. He seemed terrified. "Fear, Watson, can be a mask for guilt or a symptom of innocence," Holmes replied. "His story bears scrutiny, but the diagram is our next step. If it is a cipher, as I suspect, it may reveal what Grayson was hiding and why someone wished him to disappear." The cab rattled through the fog, the ticking of the clock still echoing in my ears. The mystery of Arthur Grayson was deepening, and I felt the familiar thrill of the chase, tempered by a growing sense of unease. What secret could a watchmaker hold that warranted blood and deception? Only Holmes I knew could unravel the truth. Chapter 4. A Trail Through the Market. The fog had begun to lift as Sherlock Holmes and I set out from Arthur Grayson's shop in Soho, the cryptic diagram and Daniel Finch's nervous admissions weighing heavily on my mind. The streets of London were awakening, their clamor a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the watchmaker's shop. Holmes, as ever, was a study in focus, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon as we hailed a hansom cab to Covent Garden. The diagram with its strange symbols was tucked securely in his coat, and I sensed his eagerness to pursue the next thread in this tangled mystery. Finch mentioned a client who unsettled Grayson, Holmes said, his voice cutting through the rattle of the cab. A tall man, finely dressed, asking questions about the clock tower job. But he also spoke of a quarrel with a clock merchant named Silas Reed who supplied Grayson with rare gears. Reed may know more than he has let on. I nodded, recalling Finch's trembling demeanor. Do you think Reed is connected to the blood at the clock tower? I asked. Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. That, Watson, is what we shall discover. Covent Garden is a hub for traders like Reed. If he is there, we will find him, and his secrets. We arrived at Covent Garden as the market reached its midday peak. The square was a riot of color and sound. Flower girls sang their wares, their baskets overflowing with roses and violets. Costermongers shouted over barrows laden with apples and cabbages, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of fresh produce, baked bread, and the faint tang of coal smoke. The crowd surged around us, a sea of top hats, bonnets, and ragged caps, and I felt a surge of exhilaration at the prospect of action. Holmes' gaze swept the market, his height giving him an advantage over the throng. Reed's stall is near the central arcade, he said, striding forward with purpose. I followed, my medical bag bumping against my side, my eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The market's vibrancy was intoxicating, but beneath it lurked an undercurrent of suspicion, as if the stalls themselves hid secrets. We reached a stall piled high with clocks and timepieces, their polished surfaces glinting in the weak sunlight. A man stood behind it, his frame wiry and his face weathered by years of trade. His eyes, sharp and wary, flicked toward us as we approached. Silas Reed? Holmes asked, his tone deceptively mild. The man nodded, his hands pausing over a brass clock. Aye, that's me. What's your business? Holmes leaned closer, his voice low but commanding. We are inquiring about Arthur Grayson, a watchmaker with whom you recently quarreled. He has vanished, and we have reason to believe you know more than you've admitted. Reed's face tightened, and his eyes darted to the crowd. I don't know nothing about Grayson's troubles, he said, his voice rough. We had words, sure, over a late payment for some gears. But that's business, not a crime. Holmes' eyes narrowed, and I sensed he was gauging the man's sincerity. Those gears, he said, were they for the Piccadilly clock tower? Reed hesitated, his fingers twitching. Before Holmes could press further, the man bolted, shoving aside a stack of clocks and darting into the crowd. The stall erupted in chaos, timepieces clattering to the ground, and I heard a flower girl's indignant cry as Reed pushed past her. After him, Watson! Holmes shouted, already in pursuit. I followed, my heart pounding as we plunged into the maze of stalls. Reed was fast, weaving through the crowd with the agility of a man accustomed to evasion. Holmes, however, was relentless, his long legs carrying him over barrels and around startled vendors. I struggled to keep pace, dodging a cart of cabbages and nearly colliding with a flower girl, who shook her fist at me. The chase led us through the central arcade, where the crowd thickened, slowing Reed's progress. Holmes gained ground, his Inverness cape billowing like a dark sail. Stop him! He called to a burly costermonger who stepped into Reed's path, forcing him to veer into a narrow alley lined with crates. The alley was a dead end, and Reed skidded to a halt, his chest heaving as he turned to face us. Holmes cornered him, his expression calm but unyielding. "Running suggests guilt, Mr. Reed," he said, his voice cutting through the din of the market. "What do you know of Arthur Grayson's disappearance?" Reed's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "I ain't guilty of nothing," he panted. "Grayson owed me money, and we argued, like I said. But I sold him those gears, rare ones from Switzerland, for a special job. He wouldn't say what, only that it was bigger than any clock in London." Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "And this job, did he mention the Piccadilly clock tower?" Reed nodded reluctantly. "Aye, he said it was tied to the tower, but he was cagey. Kept talking about controlling time and a mechanism to shift the city. Sounded half mad, if you ask me." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, the cryptic note flashing through my mind. The tower holds the key, but the shadow moves. Could Grayson's great project be connected to this talk of controlling time? Holmes pressed further. Did Grayson have enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm? Reed hesitated, his eyes flickering, with unease. "There was talk," he said at last. "Some clockmakers, old guild types, didn't like Grayson's ambition, said he was meddling with things he shouldn't. I heard whispers of a society, a secret lot who guard the trade's old ways. But I don't know names, I swear." Holmes' expression remained impassive, but I knew his mind was cataloging every word. "And the night Grayson vanished," he said. "Where were you?" "At home, with my wife," Reed said quickly. "Ask her if you don't believe me." Holmes studied him for a long moment, then stepped back. "Very well, Mr. Reed. But if you withhold anything, I will know, and I will find you again." Reed nodded, his face pale, and slipped back into the crowd. Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "A secret society of clockmakers, Watson," he said. "A fanciful notion, perhaps, but not without merit. Grayson's project, whatever it is, has stirred dangerous waters." We retraced our steps through the market, the vendors' cries and the scent of flowers enveloping us once more. I was still catching my breath, my mind racing with questions. "Do you think Reed is telling the truth?" I asked. He seemed desperate to escape. "Desperation is not always guilt," Holmes replied, his gaze scanning the stalls. "Reed knows more than he admits, but he is a small fish in a larger pond. The gears, the cipher, the talk of a society, these are threads leading us deeper. We must return to the diagram and unravel its meaning." As we hailed a cab, the market's bustle seemed to fade, replaced by the weight of the mystery. The cryptic symbols, the blood at the clock tower, and now whispers of a secret society. What had Arthur Grayson stumbled into? I glanced at Holmes, his profile sharp against the fog, and knew that only his relentless logic could pierce the shadows of this case. The cab rattled toward Baker Street, and I felt the familiar thrill of the hunt, tempered by a growing unease. The market had yielded a clue, but also a warning. Someone or something was watching, and the trail was far from clear. Chapter 5: The Locked Room. The chase through Covent Garden had left my heart pounding, but Sherlock Holmes was already turning his mind to the next thread in the mystery of Arthur Grayson's disappearance. As our hansom cab rattled away from the bustling market, he sat in silence, his sharp features illuminated by the occasional glow of a passing gas lamp. The cryptic diagram from Grayson's shop, with its strange symbols, remained tucked in his coat, and I could sense his thoughts racing to decipher its meaning. Silas Reed's talk of a secret society of clockmakers and Grayson's great project had only deepened the enigma, and I wondered what new revelation awaited us. Holmes broke the silence as we neared Bloomsbury. "Reed's information, though incomplete, points to a larger design," he said, his voice low. "Grayson's work at the clock tower was no ordinary repair. The gears, the cipher, the blood, all suggest a purpose that has drawn dangerous attention. We must learn more of his movements before he vanished. Our destination was a boarding house in Bloomsbury where, according to Daniel Finch, Grayson had rented a room separate from his shop's quarters. He used it for private work, Finch had said, his voice trembling. Kept it secret, even from me. The notion of a hidden workspace intrigued Holmes, and I could see the spark of anticipation in his eyes as we approached the address. The boarding house was a narrow 3-story building, its brick facade weathered by years of London's damp. The fog had thickened again, cloaking the street in a ghostly haze, and the gas lamps cast feeble pools of light. The landlady, a stout woman named Mrs. Carver, greeted us with suspicion, her arms crossed over a faded apron. "What do you want with Mr. Grayson's room?" she demanded, eyeing Holmes' Inverness cape and my medical bag. "We are investigating his disappearance," Holmes replied smoothly. "His sister, Miss Eleanor Grayson, has engaged us. We must see his room at once." Mrs. Carver's expression softened at the mention of Eleanor, but her voice remained sharp. "He's not been here in days. Paid a month in advance, though, so I've left his things untouched. Follow me, but don't be making a mess." She led us up a creaking staircase to the top floor where a narrow hallway ended at a single door. "It's locked," she said, producing a key. He insisted on a bolt inside, too. Odd man, always tinkering with his clocks. Holmes took the key, his eyes scanning the door's weathered surface. "Has anyone else visited this room since Grayson disappeared?" he asked. Mrs. Carver shook her head. "Not a soul. I don't pry into tenants' affairs." Holmes dismissed her with a nod, and she retreated down the stairs, muttering about meddlesome gentlemen. He tested the door, finding it indeed locked from the outside, but his keen senses detected something amiss. With a deft movement, he inserted the key, but before turning it, he knelt to examine the lock. "Curious," he murmured, his magnifying glass glinting in the dim light. "The lock has been tampered with. Scratches around the keyhole, fresh and deliberate." I frowned, peering over his shoulder. "Tampered with?" But Mrs. Carver said no one's been here. "People see what they expect to see, Watson," Holmes replied, turning the key. The lock clicked, but the door resisted. As I suspected, a bolt from the inside. Yet Grayson is not here. This promises to be interesting. He produced his lockpicks, and after a few moments of careful manipulation, the bolt slid back with a soft thud. The door creaked open, revealing a small attic room bathed in the faint glow of a single gas lamp. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of oil and metal, and the room felt oppressively small, its slanted ceiling pressing down on us. A narrow bed stood in one corner, a writing desk in another, and a single window barely a foot wide overlooked the foggy street below. The window was latched, its frame too small for a man to pass through. Holmes stepped inside, his lantern casting long shadows across the room. "A locked room, Watson," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "The classic puzzle. A man vanishes, his door bolted from within, yet no body remains. Let us see what this canvas reveals." My eyes were drawn to the desk, where a bloodied handkerchief lay crumpled beside a broken pocket watch. The watch's face was cracked, its hands frozen at midnight. I reached for the handkerchief, but Holmes stopped me with a gesture. "Careful, Watson. Every item is a clue." He examined the handkerchief, holding it to the light. The blood is dry, perhaps 2 or 3 days old, consistent with the stain at the clock tower. But note the fabric. Fine linen monogrammed with the initials AG. This belonged to Grayson. I picked up the broken watch, its gears exposed like the innards of a tiny machine. "Could this be connected to the gear we found at the clock tower?" I asked. Holmes took the watch, turning it in his fingers. "Possibly. The mechanism is intricate, far beyond a standard timepiece. Grayson was crafting something extraordinary." He set the watch down and turned to the desk, where papers were scattered in disarray. Among them was a single sheet torn at the edge, bearing a sketch of a gear system unlike any I had seen. Strange symbols, similar to those on the clock tower diagram, were scrawled beside it. Holmes' eyes gleamed as he studied the sketch. "Another piece of the cipher," he said. "Grayson was working on a device, Watson, one that required precision and secrecy. This room was his sanctuary, but someone breached it." I glanced at the bolted door, my mind racing. But how? The door was locked from the inside and the window is too small. Did Grayson stage his own disappearance? Holmes moved to the window, his magnifying glass sweeping over the frame. "The latch is intact, but look here. Faint scratches on the sill as if a tool was used to pry it open. Yet the window remains locked." He turned to the door, examining the bolt. "The bolt is new, but its screws are loose, suggesting it was removed and replaced. Someone entered this room after Grayson Watson and went to great lengths to make it appear he never left." I shivered, the room's oppressive atmosphere pressing in. "But why? To make us think he's dead?" "Precisely," Holmes said. "The blood, the locked door, the broken watch, all are meant to suggest a violent end. Yet the absence of a body tells another story. Grayson may still be alive, or his body was removed with care." We searched the room further, finding little else of note. A wardrobe held only a spare coat and a pair of boots, their soles matching the scuff marks in the shop below. A small notebook hidden beneath the mattress contained more sketches and calculations, but no clear explanation of Grayson's project. Holmes pocketed it, his expression thoughtful. As we prepared to leave, a faint sound, a creak from the hallway, caught my attention. I drew my revolver, my heart pounding. But Holmes raised a hand for silence. He moved to the door, peering into the darkened hallway. "Mrs. Carver?" he called softly. No answer came, but the creak sounded again, fainter now, as if someone were retreating down the stairs. Holmes darted out, his lantern illuminating the empty hallway. "Quickly, Watson," he said, descending the stairs with cat-like grace. We reached the ground floor, but the front door was ajar and the fog swallowed any sign of a fleeing figure. Mrs. Carver emerged from her parlor, her face pale. "What's all this noise?" she demanded. "Someone was listening," Holmes said, his eyes scanning the street. "Have you had visitors today, Mrs. Carver?" "None but you," she replied, her voice trembling. "This is a respectable house." Holmes' gaze lingered on her, but he said nothing more. We stepped into the fog, the boarding house looming behind us like a silent witness. "The locked room is a ruse, Watson," Holmes said as we hailed a cab. "Someone wishes us to believe Grayson met his end here, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The cipher, the gears, the blood, all point to a larger scheme. We must return to Baker Street and decode that diagram." The cab rattled through the fog, the mystery deepening with every turn of the wheels. The locked room had yielded clues, but also questions, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching us from the shadows. Chapter 6. Shadows of Motive. The mystery of Arthur Grayson's disappearance had taken on a darker hue as Sherlock Holmes and I left the locked room in Bloomsbury. The bloodied handkerchief, the broken watch, and the tampered bolt suggested a carefully staged deception. But to what end? The cryptic diagram with its strange symbols weighed heavily in Holmes' coat, and I could sense his mind turning over the clues like a watchmaker adjusting a delicate mechanism. The fog that cloaked London seemed to mirror the opacity of the case, and as our hansom cab rattled toward St. James's, I wondered what new revelations awaited us. Holmes had been silent during the journey, his sharp eyes fixed on the passing streets. But as we neared our destination, he spoke. "The locked room, Watson, was a distraction, meant to mislead us into believing Grayson met a violent end. Yet the absence of a body and the presence of that cipher suggest he is either alive or was removed with purpose. Our next step is to uncover the motive behind his disappearance." I nodded, my thoughts still tangled in the details of the attic room. "And this lead?" I asked. "You mentioned a financier connected to Grayson." "Indeed," Holmes replied. "Daniel Finch let slip that Grayson was in debt to a certain Lord Reginald Carver, a man of wealth and influence who frequents the St. James Club. If Grayson's great project required funding, Carver may hold the key to its nature, and to the danger it has attracted." We arrived at the St. James Club, a grand edifice of white stone that stood like a bastion of privilege amidst the fog. Its windows glowed with the warm light of gas lamps, and the faint hum of conversation drifted through the heavy oak doors. A liveried doorman eyed us with suspicion, but Holmes' commanding presence and a discreet mention of our purpose gained us entry. The interior was a world of opulence: plush carpets, leather armchairs, and walls lined with portraits of stern-faced gentlemen. The air was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and aged brandy, and the murmur of voices carried an undercurrent of secrecy. Holmes led the way to the main lounge, where men in evening dress lounged over newspapers or engaged in hushed discussions. His eyes scanned the room, and I followed his gaze to a tall, impeccably dressed man seated by a roaring fire. Lord Reginald Carver was in his late 40s, with a hawkish face, neatly trimmed whiskers, and a demeanor that exuded authority. He held a glass of brandy, but his fingers tapped restlessly on the arm of his chair, betraying a nervous energy. Holmes approached with the ease of a man accustomed to navigating such circles. "Lord Carver," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We are investigating the disappearance of Arthur Grayson, a watchmaker to whom you lent money. May we have a word?" Carver's eyes narrowed, but he gestured to the chairs opposite him. "Grayson, you say? I've heard he's vanished. A pity, but I fail to see how it concerns me." Holmes settled into a chair, his posture relaxed but his gaze piercing. "You provided Grayson with a substantial loan, did you not? For a project he described as revolutionary. We have reason to believe this project is linked to his disappearance." Carver's fingers tightened around his glass, and I noted a faint tremor in his hand. "I lend money to many men, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice cool. "Grayson was one of them. He needed funds to procure rare materials, gears, I believe, for a commission. He was vague about the details, and I did not press him. Businessmen do not pry into every venture they finance." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Carver's. "Yet you took a keen interest in Grayson's work, did you not? You visited his shop, asked questions about his commission at the Piccadilly clock tower. And I observe, sir, that the watch chain at your waist bears a gear identical to one we found at the scene of Grayson's disappearance." I followed Holmes' gaze to Carver's watch chain, where a small gleaming gear hung as an ornament. It was indeed similar to the one we had found at the clock tower, its edges etched with the same intricate design. Carver's face paled, but he recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "A coincidence, surely. Such gears are common in the trade." Holmes' smile was thin and unyielding. "Nothing in this case is coincidence, Lord Carver. The blood at the clock tower, the cryptic note, the locked room, all point to a scheme far beyond a simple loan. What did Grayson promise you? And why did you fear his work?" Carver's composure faltered, his eyes darting to the other patrons who paid us no heed. "You overstep, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice low. "I lent Grayson money, nothing more. If he's run afoul of trouble, it's no doing of mine. Perhaps he crossed the wrong people. Clockmakers can be a jealous lot." Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "A jealous lot, you say? Are you referring to this rumored society of clockmakers guarding their trade's secrets?" Carver froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "I know nothing of any society," he said too quickly. "Mere gossip, I'm sure. Grayson was ambitious, perhaps too much so. Ambition breeds enemies. Holmes rose, his movements deliberate. "We shall see, Lord Carver, but rest assured I will uncover the truth, whether it lies in ambition or something darker." As we left the club, the fog seemed to press closer, muffling the sounds of the city. I glanced at Holmes, whose expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "What did you make of him?" I asked. He seemed nervous but guilty. "Nervous, certainly," Holmes replied, hailing a cab. "Guilty? Perhaps. His watch chain is no coincidence, Watson. It links him to the gear at the clock tower, and his mention of a jealous lot echoes Silas Reed's talk of a secret society. Carver knows more than he admits, but he is not the mastermind. He is a piece in the puzzle, driven by greed or fear." I settled into the cab, my mind racing. "Grayson's project," I said. "Do you think it's truly as revolutionary as Carver suggested? Something worth killing for?" Holmes' eyes glinted in the dim light. The diagram, the gears, the cipher, all suggest a device of extraordinary purpose. Grayson spoke of controlling time and moving the city. If his project could disrupt London's rhythm, its commerce, its schedules, it would be a prize worth any price. "We must decode that cipher, Watson, before someone else does." Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the diagram on the table, its symbols stark against the parchment. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling upward as he studied the strange markings. I watched, fascinated, as his fingers traced the lines, his mind a whirl of calculation. "These symbols," he said at last, "are not random. They form a pattern, a code embedded in the diagram structure. But it requires a key, a word, a number, or perhaps another diagram." I frowned, the symbols as incomprehensible to me as hieroglyphs. "Could it be related to the clock tower's mechanism?" I asked. "Possibly," Holmes said. "The clock tower is the heart of Piccadilly, a symbol of order. If Grayson's device could manipulate it, the implications would be profound. Imagine the chaos if London's timekeeping faltered. Markets, railways, even the stock exchange would falter." I shivered at the thought, the cozy warmth of 221B suddenly feeling fragile. "And Carver?" I asked. "Do you think he's part of this society Reed mentioned?" Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes distant. "Carver is a financier, not a clockmaker, but his wealth gives him influence. He may be a pawn, funding Grayson's work for others who prefer to remain in the shadows. We must watch him, Watson, but discreetly." As the fire crackled and the fog pressed against the windows, I felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The locked room, the blood, the cipher, and now a financier with a nervous tick. All were threads in a tapestry that grew more intricate by the hour. Holmes' logic was our only guide, but I sensed we were drawing closer to a truth that might shake the very foundations of London. Chapter 7. The False Trail. The encounter with Lord Reginald Carver at the St. James Club had left us with more questions than answers. And as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, the weight of the mystery pressed heavily upon me. The cryptic diagram, the blood at the clock tower, the locked room, and now Carver's nervous demeanor, all pointed to a conspiracy surrounding Arthur Grayson's disappearance. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his mind a whirl of connections as he pored over the diagram's strange symbols by the firelight. I could see the spark in his eyes, the thrill of a puzzle that grew more intricate with each revelation. The next morning, as the fog lingered over London like a stubborn guest, a message arrived at 221B. It was a hastily scrawled note, delivered by a street urchin who vanished into the mist before I could question him. Holmes unfolded the paper, his brow furrowing as he read aloud. "Grayson seen alive at the Black Anchor, Wapping. Come quick." The note was unsigned, but its urgency was unmistakable. Holmes' eyes gleamed with suspicion. "A lead, Watson, but one that smells of misdirection," he said, folding the note. The Black Anchor is a rough place frequented by sailors and rogues. If Grayson is there, it raises questions about his disappearance. If he is not, someone wishes us to believe he is. I reached for my coat, my pulse quickening. A trap, perhaps? I asked, checking my revolver. Possibly, Holmes replied, donning his Inverness cape. But even a trap can reveal the hand that sets it. To Wapping, Watson. The game grows more intriguing. We hailed a hansom cab, and as it rattled through the fog-shrouded streets, I felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. The Thames loomed ahead, its dark waters hidden by the mist, and the air grew heavy with the scent of tar and salt. Wapping was a world apart from the elegance of St. James's, a labyrinth of docks, warehouses, and taverns where danger lurked in every shadow. The Black Anchor stood at the edge of a narrow street, its weathered sign creaking in the damp breeze. Its windows glowed faintly, and the raucous laughter within spilled out into the fog. Holmes paused at the door, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Stay alert, Watson," he said, his voice low. "This place is a hive of secrets." We stepped inside, the air thick with tobacco smoke and the stench of cheap ale. The tavern was crowded with rough-looking men, sailors with weathered faces, dock workers with calloused hands, and a few shifty figures who eyed us warily. The barman, a burly man with a scarred cheek, glanced up as we approached. Holmes leaned casually against the bar, his demeanor deceptively relaxed. "We're looking for a man named Arthur Grayson," he said, "a watchmaker last seen here." The barman's eyes narrowed and he wiped a tankard with a rag. "Don't know no Grayson," he grunted. "Lots of folk pass through here." "What's he look like?" Holmes described Grayson, medium height, slight build, auburn hair. But the barman shook his head. Before Holmes could press further, a voice called out from a corner table. "Oi, you looking for the watchmaker? I seen him." We turned to see a hulking man, his face flushed with drink, rising from his seat. His coat was patched, his knuckles scarred, and his grin revealed a missing tooth. "Name's Jakes," he said, swaying slightly. "Saw your man 2 nights back right here, drinking with some toff. Looked nervous, he did, kept checking his watch." Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "This toff, describe him," he demanded. Jakes scratched his head, his grin fading. Tall, fancy coat, wore a top hat. Didn't catch his face, but he had a gold watch chain, shiny as you please. I exchanged a glance with Holmes, my thoughts flashing to Lord Carver's watch chain with its distinctive gear. "And Grayson?" Holmes asked. "What did he do?" "Left with the toff," Jake said. "Heard 'em talking about the clock tower. Sounded like they was planning something. Then they scarpered, quick-like." Holmes' expression remained impassive, but I could sense his skepticism. "And you're certain this was 2 nights ago?" he asked. "Aye," Jake said, nodding vigorously. "Swear on me mum's grave." Holmes thanked him with a coin and led me to a quieter corner of the tavern. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" I whispered. "Grayson alive, meeting with a man who sounds like Carver?" Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Too convenient, Watson. The note, the witness, the description of a toff, it fits our suspicions too neatly. Someone is leading us on a false trail, hoping to divert our attention." I frowned, glancing at Jakes, who had returned to his tankard. "But why? To keep us from the real truth?" "Precisely," Holmes said. "The blood at the clock tower, the locked room, the cipher, all suggest a carefully orchestrated deception. This tale of Grayson and Wapping is meant to distract us, but it reveals something else. Our quarry knows we are close." We left the tavern, stepping into the fog, which seemed thicker now, muffling the sounds of the docks. Holmes paused, his gaze sweeping the street. "We are being watched, Watson," he said softly. "Do not look." But there, across the street in the shadow of that warehouse. I resisted the urge to turn, my hand resting on my revolver. "What do we do?" I asked. "We play their game for now," Holmes said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "But we turn the tables. Come, let us see if our shadow follows." He led me down a narrow alley, the fog swallowing us whole. The air was damp and cold, and the distant wail of a foghorn added to the sense of isolation. Holmes moved with purpose, his steps silent, and I followed, my senses heightened. We turned a corner, and Holmes suddenly stopped, pressing himself against the wall. "Wait," he whispered. A moment later, a figure emerged from the fog, a man cloaked and hatless, moving cautiously. Holmes sprang forward, seizing the man's arm and pinning him against the wall. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice sharp. The man, a wiry fellow with a pockmarked face, struggled briefly before slumping in defeat. "Nobody sent me," he gasped. "I'm just a messenger, paid to watch and report." "Report to whom?" Holmes pressed, his grip unrelenting. The man hesitated, then muttered, "A gent named Carver. Didn't give no first name. Paid me to keep an eye on anyone snooping round the Black Anchor." Holmes released him, his eyes blazing. "Go back to your master," he said. "Tell him Sherlock Holmes is not so easily misled." The man fled into the fog, and Holmes turned to me, his expression grim. "Carver again," he said. "He is either a fool or a pawn, but he is deeply entangled in this affair. The false trail was meant to lure us here, to waste our time or worse." I shivered, the fog's chill seeping into my bones. But what of Grayson? If he wasn't here, where is he? Holmes' gaze was distant, his mind already racing ahead. "The cipher, Watson, it holds the answer. The note, the blood, the locked room, this tavern, all are distractions from Grayson's true purpose. We must return to Baker Street and decode that diagram before our adversaries strike again." As we hailed a cab, the fog seemed to close in, the Thames a dark presence at our backs. The false trail had revealed more than its orchestrators intended, but the mystery of Arthur Grayson remained elusive. I glanced at Holmes, his profile sharp against the mist, and knew that only his relentless logic could cut through the shadows of this case. Chapter 8. The Clockmaker's Apprentice. The false trail at the Black Anchor had left us with more questions than answers, but it had also sharpened Sherlock Holmes' resolve. The shadowy figure in the alley, hired by Lord Reginald Carver, confirmed that our investigation was rattling the nerves of those involved in Arthur Grayson's disappearance. The fog-laden streets of Wapping had yielded no sign of the missing watchmaker, but they had revealed a deliberate attempt to mislead us. As our hansom cab rattled back toward Baker Street, Holmes's silence was heavy with thought, his sharp eyes fixed on the cryptic diagram we had found in Grayson's shop. The strange symbols, the blood at the clock tower, the locked room, and now Carver's involvement, all were pieces of a puzzle that grew more intricate by the hour. Yet Holmes' mind was restless, and as we passed through Soho, he abruptly called for the driver to stop. "The shop, Watson," he said, his voice low. "Finch, the apprentice, knows more than he admitted." His fear was genuine, but his story was incomplete. We must confront him again, tonight. I glanced at the darkened streets, the fog curling like a living thing around the gas lamps. "At this hour?" I asked, my hand instinctively checking the revolver in my pocket. "He may not be there." Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. "If he is hiding something, Watson, he will be there, guarding his secrets or destroying them. Come." We alighted near Grayson's shop, its gilded clock sign barely visible in the mist. The windows were dark, but a faint flicker of light leaked from beneath the shutters, betraying a presence within. Holmes approached the door, his movements silent, and tested the lock. It was unbolted, a careless oversight or a sign of haste. He pushed the door open, and we stepped into the familiar chaos of the watchmaker's shop, the air alive with the relentless ticking of clocks. The lantern's glow revealed a scene of disarray. Tools scattered across the workbench, papers strewn on the floor, and a small brazier in the corner emitting a faint wisp of smoke. At the workbench stood Daniel Finch, Grayson's apprentice, his pale face illuminated by the flickering light. He was feeding papers into the brazier, his hands trembling as the flames consumed them. The acrid smell of burning paper mingled with the scent of oil and metal, and I felt a surge of indignation at the destruction of potential evidence. "Mr. Finch," Holmes said sharply, his voice cutting through the ticking. "You seem intent on erasing your master's secrets," Finch started, dropping a handful of papers into the brazier. His eyes widened with panic, and he took a step back, nearly knocking over a stack of clocks. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he stammered. I was just tidying up. The shop's been a mess since Mr. Grayson." Holmes strode forward, his presence commanding. "Do not insult my intelligence, Finch," he said, snatching a smoldering sheet from the brazier. He stamped out the flames, revealing a partially burned sketch of a gear system, its edges marked with the same cryptic symbols as the clock tower diagram. "You are destroying evidence." "Why?" Finch's shoulders slumped, his face a mask of fear and guilt. "I didn't mean no harm," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Grayson, he told me to keep his work secret no matter what. But after he vanished, I got scared. Someone's been watching the shop, shadows outside, footsteps at night. I thought if I burned his papers, they'd leave me alone." Holmes' eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing. "Who, Finch? Who is watching you?" Finch hesitated, his hands twisting together. "I don't know their names," he said at last. "But Mr. Grayson was afraid of them, said they were powerful, part of some society. He called them the Order of the Pendulum, said they'd kill him if he didn't finish his work." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, recalling Silas Reed's mention of a secret society of clockmakers and Lord Carver's evasive comments. "The Order of the Pendulum?" I asked. "What did Grayson say about them?" Finch swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the shadows. He said they guard the trade, keep its secrets. They wanted his project, a device he was building for the clock tower. He wouldn't tell me much, only that it could change time itself. He was proud, but scared too. Said the Order would stop at nothing to control it. Holmes held up the burned sketch, its symbols glowing faintly in the lantern's light. "This device," he said, "was it meant to manipulate the Piccadilly clock tower?" Finch nodded, his voice trembling. "Aye, sir. He said it could alter the clock's rhythm, make it run fast or slow, or stop it altogether. I thought he was daft, but he showed me sketches, gears and levers like nothing I'd ever seen. Said it could disrupt London, make the city dance to a new beat." Holmes' expression was unreadable, but I could see the gears of his mind turning. "And you, Finch," he said, "did you betray your master to this order?" Finch's face crumpled, and he sank onto a stool, his hands covering his face. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed. "They came to the shop a week ago, 2 men cloaked, faces hidden. They threatened me, said they'd hurt my family if I didn't tell them what Mr. Grayson was doing. I told him about the clock tower, the device, but I swear I didn't know they'd take him." I felt a pang of pity for the young man, but Holmes' voice was cold. "You betrayed him, Finch, and now he is missing. Perhaps dead. Who were these men? Describe them." Finch shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. I couldn't see their faces. One was tall, with a deep voice like a gentleman. The other was shorter, rougher, like he'd worked the docks. They mentioned a lord who was paying him, but no name. Holmes' eyes gleamed, and I knew he was thinking of Lord Carver. "And the papers you burned?" he asked. "What were they?" "Sketches, notes," Finch said. "Mr. Grayson's plans for the device. I thought if they were gone, the Order would leave me be. I was wrong. They've been watching ever since." Holmes sifted through the ashes in the brazier, salvaging a few scraps of paper. One bore a partial symbol, a circle bisected by a line, identical to those on the clock tower diagram. "You have destroyed much, Finch," he said, his voice low but not all. "This confirms the device's importance. The Order of the Pendulum seeks to control it, and Grayson's disappearance is their doing." I stepped forward, my voice gentler than Holmes. "Why didn't you go to the police, lad?" Finch looked up, his eyes haunted. "They said they had men in the police, men who'd make sure I regretted it." "I didn't know what to do, Dr. Watson. I just wanted to protect my family." Holmes' expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "You will stay here, Finch, and speak of this to no one. If you flee, I will find you. Your cooperation may yet redeem your mistake." Finch nodded, his face pale. Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight with purpose. "The Order of the Pendulum, Watson," he said as we stepped back into the fog. "A secret society, as Reed and Carver hinted. They seek Grayson's device, a mechanism capable of disrupting London's timekeeping. The implications are staggering. Commerce, railways, even the government depend on the city's clocks." I shivered, the ticking of the shop still echoing in my ears. But why? To what end? Holmes' gaze was distant, his mind racing. "Power, Watson. Control over time is control over order. If the Piccadilly clock tower could be manipulated, it would sow chaos, profitable chaos for those who know it's coming. Carver is involved, but he is not the mastermind. The Order is the true threat." As we hailed a cab, the fog seemed to thicken, the street lamps mere pinpricks of light. The shop's ticking faded, but the weight of Finch's confession lingered. Grayson's device, the Order, the blood at the clock tower, all were converging toward a truth that felt both tantalizingly close and dangerously elusive. I glanced at Holmes, his profile sharp against the mist, and knew that the next move in this deadly game would be his. Chapter 9. The Midnight Confrontation. The revelation of the Order of the Pendulum, coupled with Daniel Finch's tearful confession, had propelled the mystery of Arthur Grayson's disappearance into dangerous new territory. Sherlock Holmes' mind was a whirlwind of calculation as we left the watchmaker's shop in Soho, the cryptic diagram and its symbols burning in his thoughts. The fog clung to London like a conspirator, muffling the city's sounds as we hailed a hansom cab. Holmes' silence was heavy with purpose, and I knew he was piecing together the threads of the case: the blood at the clock tower, the locked room, Lord Carver's involvement, and now the shadowy Order seeking Grayson's revolutionary device. "Watson," Holmes said as the cab rattled toward Piccadilly Circus, "Finch's confession confirms the clock tower as the heart of this mystery. Grayson's device, capable of manipulating time itself, is the prize the Order seeks. If Grayson is alive, he is likely there, either as a prisoner or a reluctant collaborator." I gripped my revolver, the weight of it reassuring in my pocket. "And if the Order is watching, as Finch claimed, they'll be expecting us," I said. Holmes' eyes glinted in the dim light. "Let them watch. We shall turn their vigilance against them. Tonight we end this charade." It was nearing midnight when we reached Piccadilly Circus, the square eerily quiet, its usual bustle silenced by the late hour. The clock tower loomed above us, its great face glowing faintly through the fog, the hands pointing to 12. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and coal smoke, and the distant clatter of a lone hansom cab echoed like a ghost. Holmes led the way to the iron door at the tower's base, his lockpicks at the ready. The door yielded with a soft click, and we stepped into the dark. The grinding of the clock's gears filling the air with a relentless tick-tock. The narrow staircase spiraled upward, its iron steps slick with condensation. Holmes' lantern cast stark shadows on the walls, and I followed close behind, my heart pounding with anticipation. The tower felt alive, its mechanism a pulsing heart, and I could not shake the sense that we were walking into a trap. "Stay sharp, Watson," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible over the ticking. "We are not alone." We reached the platform overlooking the clock's massive gears, their slow, deliberate movements a testament to the precision of time. The lantern's light revealed a figure huddled in the shadows, bound and gagged, his auburn hair unmistakable. "Grayson!" I exclaimed, starting forward. Holmes seized my arm, his eyes darting to the darkness. "Wait!" he hissed. "This is too easy." Before I could respond, a cloaked figure emerged from behind a gear, the glint of a pistol catching the lantern's light. The man was tall, his face partially obscured by a scarf, but his posture and the gold watch chain at his waist betrayed him. "Lord Carver," Holmes said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Your presence here confirms your role in this affair." Carver lowered the scarf, revealing his hawkish features now twisted with desperation. "You've meddled too far, Holmes," he said, his voice trembling. "This was never meant to involve you. Grayson's device is mine, my investment, my triumph." Holmes stepped forward, his hands raised but his gaze unyielding. "Your investment," he said, "or the order of the pendulums. You are no mastermind, Carver, merely a pawn in their game. Tell me, what does the device do and why is Grayson bound?" Carver's eyes flickered to Grayson, who struggled against his bonds, his muffled cries barely audible over the gears. "He refused to complete it," Carver said, his pistol wavering. "The device, it can stop the clock tower, disrupt London's timekeeping, markets, railways, the exchange. All would falter, and those who know can profit from the chaos. The order promised me wealth beyond imagining if I funded Grayson's work." I felt a chill, the implications staggering. "You'd throw London into chaos for profit?" I said, my hand inching toward my revolver. Carver's laugh was bitter. "You think I had a choice? The order doesn't ask, Dr. Watson. They command. Grayson was a fool to defy them." Holmes' voice was cold. "And the blood at the tower, the locked room, all staged to make us believe Grayson was dead?" Carver nodded, his grip tightening on the pistol. "Animal blood, a distraction. We needed time to force Grayson to finish the device, but he hid the final plans encoded in that damn diagram. I knew you'd find it, Holmes, and I tried to lead you astray with that tavern nonsense." Holmes' eyes gleamed with triumph. "A false trail, as I suspected. But you underestimated me, Carver. Drop the pistol, and this need not end in violence." Carver hesitated, his eyes wild. Before he could respond, a shadow moved behind him. A second figure, cloaked and silent, emerging from the gears. I shouted a warning, but it was too late. The figure lunged, a blade flashing in the lantern's light. Carver cried out, stumbling forward, and Holmes seized the moment, diving for the pistol. A struggle ensued, the clang of metal echoing as Holmes wrestled the weapon from Carver's grasp. I drew my revolver, aiming at the second figure, but they vanished into the shadows, their footsteps fading down the staircase. Holmes disarmed Carver, pinning him against a gear. "Who was that?" he demanded. "Your master in the order?" Carver gasped, blood seeping from a shallow wound in his side. "I don't know his name," he choked. "The order, they never show their faces. They'll kill me for this." Holmes released him, turning to Grayson. I rushed to the watchmaker, cutting his bonds and removing the gag. Grayson was pale, his face haggard but alive. "Mr. Holmes," he rasped, "thank God you came. They wanted my device, but I hid the key, the cipher in the diagram. It's the only way to complete it." Holmes helped Grayson to his feet, his expression grim. "We must get you to safety," he said. "Carver, you will come with us. The police will want your story." Carver slumped against the gear, his fight gone. "The order will find me," he muttered. "You've no idea what you've stirred, Holmes." We descended the tower, Grayson leaning heavily on me, Carver stumbling ahead with Holmes' firm grip on his arm. The fog outside was thicker than ever, the clock tower's chime marking midnight with a deep, resonant toll. As we emerged into the square, I glanced back, half expecting to see the cloaked figure watching from the shadows, but the fog revealed nothing. Holmes hailed a cab, his eyes scanning the mist. "The order is still out there, Watson," he said. "Carver is a tool, not the master. The cipher remains our key to unraveling their plans." Grayson clutched my arm, his voice weak but urgent. "The device? It's dangerous, Dr. Watson. I never meant for it to be used this way. I wanted to prove time could be mastered, not to destroy order." I patted his shoulder, my heart heavy with the weight of the night's events. "You're safe now," I said, though I wasn't certain I believed it. As the cab rattled toward Baker Street, the fog seemed to pulse with unseen threats. The confrontation in the clock tower had saved Grayson and exposed Carver, but the order of the pendulum remained a shadow over us all. I glanced at Holmes, his profile sharp against the mist, and knew that the final piece of this puzzle was within his grasp. If only we could survive the game long enough to claim it. Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. The midnight confrontation in the Piccadilly clock tower had brought the mystery of Arthur Grayson's disappearance to a thrilling crescendo. Yet the shadow of the order of the pendulum lingered like the fog that enveloped London. As our hansom cab carried us back to Baker Street, with Arthur Grayson weak but alive, and Lord Reginald Carver subdued and silent, I felt a mix of relief and unease. The cryptic diagram, the blood, the locked room, and the whispers of a secret society had woven a tapestry of deception, and only Sherlock Holmes' relentless logic could unravel its final threads. We arrived at 221B in the early hours, the fog thick and unrelenting. Mrs. Hudson, roused from sleep, ushered us into the sitting room with a mix of concern and exasperation. "You'll catch your death in this weather, Mr. Holmes," she chided. But she quickly set about preparing tea and summoning Miss Eleanor Grayson, who had been waiting anxiously for news of her brother. Eleanor arrived within the hour, her pale face lighting with joy at the sight of Arthur, who sat wrapped in a blanket by the fire. She rushed to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Arthur, thank God!" she cried, embracing him. "I feared you were lost forever." Holmes stood by the mantel, his pipe unlit, his sharp eyes observing the reunion with quiet satisfaction. I settled into my armchair, my medical bag at my side, ready to tend to Arthur's minor injuries. A few bruises and a cut lip from his ordeal. Carver, meanwhile, sat sullenly in a corner, his hands bound, his hawkish features drawn with defeat. The police had been summoned, but Holmes had insisted on explaining the case before they arrived. "Miss Grayson, Mr. Grayson," Holmes began, his voice calm but commanding. "You have endured a harrowing ordeal, and I owe you the truth of what has transpired. Watson, you have been my steadfast companion in this affair, and you too deserve the full picture. Let us begin with the facts." He lit his pipe, the smoke curling upward as he paced before the fire. Arthur Grayson, a watchmaker of exceptional skill, was commissioned to repair the Piccadilly clock tower, a task that, on its surface, seemed routine. But Arthur had ambitions beyond mere repairs. He was designing a device, a mechanism of extraordinary precision capable of manipulating the clock tower's rhythm. It could slow, hasten, or stop the clock entirely, disrupting the very pulse of London, its markets, railways, and commerce. Arthur nodded weakly, his voice hoarse. "It was a dream, Mr. Holmes," he said. "I wanted to prove that time could be mastered, that a watchmaker could hold sway over the city's order. I never meant for it to be used for harm." Holmes' eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. A noble ambition, but one that drew the attention of dangerous men. The Order of the Pendulum, a secret society of clockmakers guarding their trade's traditions, saw your device as a threat or an opportunity. They sought to control it, to wield its power for their own ends. Eleanor's eyes widened. "This order," she said, "who are they?" Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke. "Their identities remain shrouded, but their influence is clear. They are a cabal of craftsmen bound by secrecy who believe their trade holds sway over time itself. Your brother's device threatened their monopoly, and they acted to seize it. Lord Carver here was their instrument." Carver shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the floor. Holmes continued, his voice cutting like a blade. "Carver, a financier with a taste for profit, lent you money, Arthur, to fund your project. But he was not acting alone. The Order used him, promising wealth if he ensured your device was completed under their control. When you resisted, they staged your disappearance." I leaned forward, my mind racing to piece together the clues. "The blood at the clock tower," I said. "It was a ruse?" "Indeed, Watson," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "The blood was animal, not human, spilled to suggest violence and deter inquiry. The locked room in Bloomsbury with its bloodied handkerchief and broken watch was another deception, designed to make us believe Arthur was dead. The bolt was tampered with, the window scratched to suggest entry, but no body was found because Arthur was alive, hidden in the clock tower, coerced to finish his work." Arthur's voice trembled as he spoke. "They kept me there, Mr. Holmes, bound in the tower's shadows. They threatened my sister, my life, if I didn't complete the device. But I hid the final key, the cipher in the diagram. Without it, the device is useless." Holmes held up the diagram, its symbols stark against the parchment. "This cipher," he said, "was your safeguard, Arthur. The symbols encode the final adjustments to your device, a sequence of gears and levers that only you could decipher. The Order sought it, and Carver, their pawn, orchestrated the false trail at the Black Anchor to distract us." Carver's head snapped up, his voice bitter. "I had no choice, Holmes. The Order, they're everywhere. They promised me riches, but they'd have killed me if I failed." Holmes' smile was thin. "You chose greed over honor, Carver, and it has undone you. The cloaked figure in the clock tower, the one who wounded you, was an agent of the Order, ensuring you did not betray them. But you have, and now you will face justice." Eleanor clutched her brother's hand, her eyes fixed on Holmes. "And the device? Is it safe?" Holmes nodded. "With the cipher in our possession and Arthur free, the device cannot be completed. I have instructed Inspector Lestrade to seize the components from the clock tower. The Order's plans are thwarted for now." I frowned, a lingering unease nagging at me. "For now, Holmes? You think the Order will try again?" Holmes' gaze was distant, his pipe smoke curling like a wraith. "The Order of the Pendulum is a shadow, Watson, and shadows do not vanish with the dawn. They will regroup, but we have struck a blow. Arthur's device, though brilliant, is too dangerous to exist. I trust, Mr. Grayson, you will destroy your plans?" Arthur nodded, his face resolute. "I never meant for this, Mr. Holmes. I'll burn every sketch, every note. Time should serve man, not enslave him." Holmes' eyes softened, a rare moment of warmth, a wise choice. The pursuit of knowledge is noble, but its misuse is a peril we must guard against. As the fire crackled and the tea grew cold, I felt the weight of the case lift, though the fog outside seemed to press closer, a reminder of the unseen threats still lurking. Eleanor and Arthur sat together, their reunion a quiet triumph amidst the storm of intrigue. Carver, defeated, awaited the police, his dreams of wealth shattered. Holmes settled into his armchair, his pipe glowing faintly. "This case, Watson, reminds us of a truth as old as time itself," he said, his voice reflective. "Greed distorts reason, blinding men to the ticking of their own morality. But truth, like time, cannot be stopped. It moves forward, relentless, until all is revealed. I nodded, the moral resonating deeply. "You've done it again, Holmes," I said. "You've brought light to the shadows." He smiled faintly, his eyes on the fire. "The shadows remain, Watson, but for now we have held them at bay." The police arrived soon after, taking Carver into custody. Eleanor and Arthur left for her home, their gratitude heartfelt. As the door closed behind them, I turned to Holmes, the room now quiet save for the crackle of the fire. "Do you think the order will come for us?" I asked. Holmes' gaze was steady, his voice calm. "Let them come, Watson. We shall be ready." The fog pressed against the windows and the fire burned low, casting a warm glow over 221B. The mystery of the clock tower was solved, but I knew that other shadows waited in the wings, and Holmes, as ever, would be there to meet them.